The night was quiet, but not peaceful. Ethan sat alone in his small kitchen, the dim light above the table buzzing faintly. Outside, the wind howled against the walls of his old wooden house, making the windows rattle with every gust. He had grown used to nights like this, silent, heavy, and without company. He stirred his spoon in the bowl of soup before him. But he was not hungry. It was habit more than need. He lived alone, worked alone, and ate alone. Day after day, he had stopped noticing the weight of silence around him. But tonight felt different. Tonight the silence was heavier, like someone else was there, watching. A faint sound came from the window, soft but sharp, like claws tapping glass. Ethan froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He slowly turned his head. The curtains trembled slightly. He frowned. Perhaps it was the wind, perhaps a tree branch, yet his instincts whispered something else. He stood up, chair legs scraping the floor. The sound came again, this time clearer, a hesitant tap, not by accident, but on purpose. Ethan's heart quickened. He walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside with caution, and gasped softly. Outside, half hidden in the shadows of the night, stood a figure, not human, not familiar, her skin pale with a faint silver glow, eyes too large for her face, reflecting the dim light from his kitchen. Her frame was thin, fragile, as if hunger had carved her bones sharper than they should be. Ethan stepped back, his breath caught in his throat. An alien, here, outside his home. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The creature, or perhaps woman, did not move closer. She stood trembling, her hands pressed against the glass, her gaze fixed not on Ethan, but on the bowl of soup still steaming on the table behind him. The air felt colder, heavier. Ethan's mind raced. Fear told him to shut the curtains, lock the doors, and pretend it was not real. But curiosity rooted him in place. And something deeper than curiosity, something human, whispered in his chest. She was not attacking. She was not armed. She looked hungry, lonely, and desperate. The alien's lips parted, but no sound came. Only a faint breath fogging the glass. Her eyes flickered from the soup to Ethan's face, then back again. Ethan swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. He had read stories of aliens, of invasions, of danger, but this did not look like a conqueror. This looked like a lost soul begging for warmth. Ethan's hand moved slowly toward the window latch, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. Every second stretched longer, heavier. He hesitated, torn between reason and instinct, but the sight of her thin frame swaying with weakness decided for him. He unlocked the window and pushed it open. The cold night air rushed in. The alien woman staggered back a step, as if afraid of what he would do. Ethan raised his hands gently, showing he held no weapon, his voice soft but steady. "It's all right," he said, though he knew she could not understand his words. The tone mattered more than the meaning. She blinked, uncertain, her hands clutching the edge of the window frame. Ethan took the bowl of soup from the table, the steam rising into the air between them. Her eyes widened, locked onto it, her lips trembling. Ethan placed the bowl carefully on the windowsill and stepped back, giving her space. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind howled around them, carrying the weight of silence and decision. Then slowly, very slowly, she leaned forward, her trembling fingers wrapping around the warm bowl. She lifted it with both hands, her thin shoulders shaking. She sniffed it first, as if unsure it was safe, then took a small sip. The warmth of the broth seemed to melt something in her. Her eyes closed, a shiver running through her body. She drank again, deeper this time, her throat working with quiet desperation. Ethan watched, his breath caught somewhere between fear and awe. The alien woman ate with the hunger of someone who had not tasted food for days, maybe longer, yet each movement was cautious, respectful, as though she feared this gift might be taken away. When she finished, she lowered the empty bowl slowly, her large eyes lifting to meet his. For the first time, there was something new in them, not only hunger, but gratitude, a spark of trust, fragile and faint, but real. Ethan felt it too, a weight lifting, replaced with something else, something dangerous yet hopeful. He had opened his home to the unknown, and the unknown had accepted. The night was no longer silent, no longer empty, and neither was he. The kitchen was quiet, yet the silence between them was alive. Ethan stood a few steps back, his breath steady but his heart still racing. The alien woman clutched the empty bowl in both hands, as if letting go might make the food vanish. Her large eyes searched his face, not with hostility, but with the cautious look of someone who had survived too much. The wind outside pressed against the house, whistling through the cracks, but neither of them moved. For a moment, Ethan felt like time had slowed. Two different worlds had collided in his small, lonely kitchen. He was a man used to silence, but now silence felt heavier. It carried questions, fear, and something else he could not name. Her skin, faintly glowing under the kitchen light, seemed almost translucent. Veins like pale silver ran beneath the surface. Her clothes, or what remained of them, were torn and dirt-stained. Thin fabric wrapped loosely around her frame, offering little protection against the cold night air. She looked exhausted, fragile, yet there was a strange dignity in the way she stood. Ethan gently extended his hand, not touching, but showing his openness. "It's all right," he whispered again, though he knew she would not understand the words. His voice was low, calm, steady. Her gaze dropped to his hand, then lifted back to his eyes. Her thin shoulders trembled, and for a heartbeat Ethan thought she might flee into the night. Instead, she stepped inside, one foot crossing the window frame cautiously, then the other, her movements slow, unsteady, as though each step was a test of trust. Ethan stepped aside to give her space. She entered his kitchen, her presence filling the small room with a weight that was both strange and fragile. The alien woman looked around, her head tilting slightly, observing the details of his world. The flickering bulb, the chipped wooden table, the kettle on the counter. Her gaze lingered on the simple bread loaf by the soup pot. Hunger still lived in her eyes, but there was also hesitation, as if she did not want to take more than he offered. Ethan noticed her shivering, the night air still clinging to her thin frame. He moved slowly to the small stove and poured hot water into a cup. The steam rose between them, filling the space with warmth. He set it on the table and stepped back once more. She followed the cup with her eyes, then cautiously approached, her fingers curling around it. When she sipped, her eyes closed briefly, and her shoulders eased. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She was calming, if only a little. He could see it in the way her trembling slowed, in the way her eyes softened when they opened again. They did not share words, but something unspoken passed between them, the smallest thread of connection, fragile yet undeniable. Ethan had lived long enough in silence to recognize when silence carried meaning. He pointed gently at himself. "Ethan," he said, his name, his voice low and steady. She blinked, tilting her head, then placed the cup down carefully. Her lips parted, a sound escaped, soft and broken, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. It was not his language, not any language he knew, but it was a name, hers. She spoke it again, clearer this time, though strange on his ears. Ethan repeated it clumsily, his tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. The faintest spark of something warmer flickered across her face. Trust. For the first time, Ethan noticed the wounds, small scars running along her arms, a deeper cut at her side half hidden by torn fabric. He realized she had not only been hungry, but hurt, running from something, or someone. His stomach tightened at the thought. Her eyes darted toward the window suddenly, sharp and alert, as if expecting danger. Ethan followed her gaze, but the night outside was still, dark, silent. Only the wind moved, but her reaction told him enough. She was not only lost, she was hunted. Ethan placed another piece of bread on the table and pushed it gently toward her, but she did not move. Her gaze stayed on the window, her body tense. Ethan understood then. She had found safety for only a moment, but danger lived close behind her, and it might soon follow. He spoke again, his voice low, steady, though she could not understand. "You're safe here," he said. The words were simple, but his tone carried the promise. She turned her gaze back to him, studying his face, her breathing still uneven. Then, slowly, she reached for the bread, not with greed, but with care, as though every gesture had to be earned. She broke it gently, taking only a small bite, her eyes never leaving his. Ethan felt a shift in the air, fragile trust deepening into something more. The night outside remained cold and empty, But inside the small kitchen, something had changed. A human and an alien stood together, sharing warmth, food, and silence that was no longer lonely. The warmth of the kitchen wrapped around them, but the tension did not fade. Ethan sat at the table now, his hands resting loosely on the wood. The alien woman sat across from him, her posture tense, her large eyes flicking between him and the door. She ate slowly, careful bites of the bread, as though afraid it might vanish if she took too much. Ethan studied her, not with suspicion, but with quiet wonder. He had lived years in solitude, and yet in a single night the silence had been broken by something extraordinary. She was real, she was here, and her presence carried more weight than words ever could. Her gaze finally settled on him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if studying him in return. Ethan offered a small smile, tentative, unsure if she would recognize the gesture. She tilted her head, then her lips pressed together in a faint, almost invisible movement. Not quite a smile, but not rejection either. He pointed again to himself, repeating softly, "Ethan," then pointed at her, waiting. She hesitated, her lips trembling before a sound escaped. Her name, alien and strange, carried softly into the air. Ethan repeated it, his tongue stumbling but determined. She blinked, surprised, then gave the faintest nod. The exchange was fragile, yet powerful. In that small kitchen, two beings from different worlds spoke without truly understanding. But the effort mattered. Ethan felt it, and she seemed to feel it too. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup of hot water. Ethan noticed the scars again, the bruises on her arms, the wound hidden near her ribs. She had been through more than hunger. She had been hurt, perhaps chased, perhaps punished. His chest tightened with the thought. She caught him staring and pulled her torn fabric tighter around herself, her posture defensive. Ethan raised his hands gently, palms open, showing he meant no harm. He glanced toward the small first aid box on the shelf, then back to her wound, then back to the box, making the offer without words. Her eyes followed his gesture. She understood. Her lips pressed into a thin line, distrust warring with need. After a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. Ethan rose slowly, careful not to startle her. He retrieved the box, set it on the table, and opened it, pulling out clean cloth and ointment. She stiffened as he moved closer, her eyes locked on his hands. Ethan knelt beside her, his motion slow, deliberate. He waited. She hesitated, her breath uneven, then slowly shifted her torn garment aside, revealing the cut at her side, shallow but painful, swollen from neglect. Ethan's hands worked with care, cleaning the wound, wrapping it with fresh cloth, each touch gentle, each motion steady. She winced but did not pull away, her eyes never leaving his face, searching for betrayal that never came. When he finished, he tied the bandage neatly and stepped back, giving her space again. Her gaze lingered on the bandage, then rose to meet his. Something in her eyes softened, the sharp edge of fear dulled by trust. She touched the cloth lightly with her fingers, then pressed her palm to her chest, a gesture of thanks. Perhaps Ethan didn't know her words, but he understood the meaning. For the first time, the silence between them was not heavy. It was warm. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. She sipped from her cup again, calmer now, her shoulders easing little by little. The fire of hunger in her eyes was dimmed, replaced by a faint glow of relief. Ethan realized then that she was more than a survivor. She was someone who had lost something, someone who carried pain too heavy for words, and yet here she was, alive, sitting in his kitchen. Outside, the wind rattled the windows again, but neither flinched. Inside, there was a fragile peace, a silent agreement that neither would harm the other. Ethan had offered food, warmth, and care, and she had accepted. The bond between them had started not with words, but with action, with a meal, with kindness, with trust earned slowly, piece by piece. Ethan looked at her, and she at him, and in that moment, he understood something. He was no longer entirely alone, and neither was she. The night stretched on, but neither Ethan nor the alien woman moved to leave the kitchen. The soft glow from the single light above gave the room a fragile warmth, a small island of safety against the cold and silent world outside. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. She sat opposite him, her body wrapped in the torn fabric she called clothing, her silver-like skin reflecting the light in soft glimmers. She held the cup of water close, as if guarding it. Her large eyes flicked around the room, always alert, always cautious. It was clear to Ethan that she had lived too long in fear. Every sound from outside made her body tense. Every movement he made caused her to study him closely, like she expected a sudden strike. Ethan understood. Trust was not given, it was earned, and he would have to earn hers slowly. He pushed the small loaf of bread toward her again. She hesitated, her thin fingers curling. Then she broke a small piece, chewing slowly, her eyes never leaving him. When she swallowed, he smiled faintly, not forcing, but showing kindness. She tilted her head slightly, almost curious. Ethan pointed at the bread, then spoke the word softly. Bread. His tone calm, slow. She blinked, staring at him. Her lips moved, repeating something close, not exact, but close enough. Ethan nodded encouragingly. She tried again. The word still broken, still alien on her tongue, but closer. For the first time, she did not only copy the sound. She watched his mouth, studied his lips as he formed the word, and then shaped it again with her own. This time clearer. Ethan's smile widened. Her eyes flickered with the faintest spark of pride. The barrier of silence was still strong, but cracks had begun to show. Small, fragile cracks where connection seeped through. Ethan tried again, pointing to himself. Ethan, he said, firmly but gently. She tilted her head, then repeated it, her voice soft, uncertain, but correct. Her lips formed the sound almost perfectly. Then she pointed at herself, her name leaving her lips, soft and strange. Ethan repeated it, clumsy at first, then better. Her gaze sharpened, her eyes softened at the same time. She nodded faintly, the smallest approval. The kitchen seemed warmer in that moment, two voices speaking across a chasm of difference, and yet finding a bridge. Ethan noticed her hand trembling when she reached for the bread again, not from fear, but weakness. Hunger had drained her. Exhaustion clung to her body. He stood, moved to the stove, and poured another bowl of soup. She stiffened as he approached, but he set it down gently in front of her, stepping back, letting her decide. She looked at him, then at the soup, her lips pressed tightly. Then she picked up the spoon with slow, careful movements. She tasted, paused, then ate, not in desperation this time, but in steady, measured bites, as if she was beginning to believe this food was truly hers. Her gaze lifted to Ethan again, softer now, her shoulders lowered, some of the tension leaving her body. She ate quietly, but her eyes carried something new, not just hunger, but gratitude, trust slowly taking root. When she finished, she placed the spoon down carefully, her thin hands resting on the table. She looked at Ethan, then pressed her palm gently to her chest, her head dipping slightly. Ethan understood. It was thanks. No words were needed. He nodded, then mirrored her gesture, hand to his chest. She blinked, her eyes widening slightly. Then she gave a faint nod in return. A bond was forming, slow and fragile, but undeniable. Yet outside, the world was not silent. In the distance, faint and far, Ethan thought he heard something. Metal clashing, voices carried on the wind. He frowned, glancing at the window, but when he turned back, her eyes were already fixed on him, sharp, fearful. She had heard it too. Her body tensed, ready to flee, her hands clutching the edge of the table. Ethan raised his hands again, calm, steady. It's all right, he whispered, though words alone could not erase her fear. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the walls. Then slowly, she eased, her breathing ragged, but she did not run, she stayed. Ethan realized then how fragile this peace was, how easily it could be broken. But he also realized something else. This night had changed everything. He had opened his door to the unknown, and now the unknown had chosen to stay. Whatever danger lingered outside, whatever past haunted her, for now, here, in this small kitchen, the barrier between human and alien had cracked, and something far more important had begun. The alien woman sat in silence, her large eyes fixed on the window. Ethan could see it clearly now. Fear lived inside her, not the kind born from hunger alone, but the kind carved by something chasing her, something that had left scars deeper than the ones on her skin. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his voice soft. "You're safe here," he said, though he knew she could not understand his words. Still, the tone carried a promise, and promises sometimes spoke louder than language. Her breathing was uneven, her fingers gripping the edge of her torn fabric. Ethan's gaze softened. He pointed gently to the bandage on her side, then to the scars that crossed her arms. He didn't ask with words, but his eyes carried the question, who had done this to her? For a moment she sat still, her gaze locked on his. Then, slowly, she lifted the torn fabric higher, revealing more of the wounds, old scars layered across her ribs, burns shaped like cruel brands. Ethan's chest tightened, anger rising quietly inside him. Whoever had hurt her had not just left her starving, they had tried to break her. Her hand shook as she lowered the fabric again, her head dropping, shame and fear shadowing her face. Ethan felt a heavy ache in his chest. He wanted to speak, to tell her she was not broken, but all he could do was reach across the table, slowly, carefully, until his hand rested near hers, not touching, but close. She looked at it, then at him, her lips parted, and for the first time her voice rose more than a whisper. The words strange, broken, not his language, but filled with meaning. Her hand pressed against her chest, then pointed outward, toward the night beyond the window. Her voice trembled as she repeated the sound. Ethan did not understand the words, but he understood enough. She had run from someone, or something. Out there, she was not just lost, she was hunted. Her eyes filled with tears, shimmering in the dim light. She blinked quickly, as if refusing to let them fall. Ethan's chest tightened again. She had suffered more than hunger. She had carried loneliness, pain, and fear with her every step. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He stood and walked to the stove, his movements deliberate, steady. He ladled more soup into a bowl, his hands careful. He placed it on the table in front of her, then sat again. He said nothing, only watched as she stared at it. Her trembling hands reached out. She ate quietly, tears sliding down her cheeks now, though she tried to hide them. Each bite seemed to carry not only food, but something else. Acceptance, hope, the first spark of safety. When she finished, she placed the spoon down gently, her shoulders shaking. Ethan sat still, giving her the space to breathe, to grieve, to feel. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze to him, her eyes red but steady. Her hand pressed to her chest again, and she whispered her name. Ethan repeated it, softer this time, gentler. Her lips trembled, but this time she nodded. The silence between them was no longer heavy with fear. It was filled with something new, fragile, but real. Trust was no longer a spark. It was beginning to grow. Outside, the night stretched wide, the cold wind howling against the walls. But inside the kitchen warmth lingered, warmth born not only from food or light, but from something deeper. Ethan realized then that he had crossed a line. He had not only offered food, he had offered care. He had seen her wounds, her scars, her fear, and instead of turning away, he had stayed. And in that choice, something changed, not only for her, but for him. He was no longer the man who lived only with silence. He was part of something greater now, a bond that had formed against all odds. The alien woman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her breath uneven, but calmer. She looked at him with eyes that no longer held only fear, but something else, something new. A flicker of trust, a flicker of hope, a silent truth revealed between them. The night outside grew darker, the wind louder, but inside the small kitchen, a fragile peace remained. Ethan sat quietly, watching the alien woman as she traced her fingers over the bandage on her side, her eyes distant, filled with memories too heavy to share. She looked weak still, her body thin, her frame trembling from exhaustion. Ethan knew she needed more than food. She needed rest, warmth, and safety, things so simple for him, yet almost impossible for her until this night. He rose slowly, careful not to startle her, and walked to the stove. He ladled another portion of soup into a bowl, richer this time. With the last of the vegetables he had, he placed it gently in front of her, stepping back, his hands open, offering, not demanding. Her gaze flicked to the bowl, then to him, her eyes filled with hesitation, but the hunger in her body betrayed her. She picked up the spoon, eating carefully, Slowly, savoring each bite, no longer desperate, but still cautious, Ethan watched, not as a guard, but as someone who wanted her to heal. When she finished, she placed the spoon down with a small clink, her fingers lingering on the rim of the bowl. Then she looked up, her eyes softer now, the edge of fear dulling. Ethan gave a small nod, his lips curving into a faint smile. Her lips parted, a whisper left her throat, her voice shaking but stronger than before. She said her name again, then pressed her hand to her chest. Ethan repeated it, carefully, this time smoother, closer to the way she said it. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She pointed at him. Ethan, she said slowly, her voice stumbling but determined. Ethan froze for a moment, then smiled wider, his chest warming. She had spoken his name, clumsy but real. A small sound left her lips, not quite laughter, but the faintest echo of it. Ethan realized she was learning, not just words, but trust. The silence between them grew warmer, no longer heavy with suspicion. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. He glanced at the old blanket folded on the chair. He picked it up, walked toward her carefully, and offered it. She blinked, staring at it, then at him, her body tensing. But when he draped it gently over her shoulders, her trembling eased. Her hands reached up to clutch the fabric tightly, warmth spreading across her thin frame. Her eyes shimmered again, but this time not from fear, from something else, a fragile gratitude. For the first time since she had entered his home, her posture eased, her shoulders lowering, her eyes softening. She sat back against the chair, her body no longer ready to flee, but ready, perhaps, to stay. Ethan sat again. Watching her, he poured himself a small bowl of soup and ate slowly, making sure she could see he was sharing the same meal, not offering scraps, but the same food, equal. Her gaze followed, and then she mimicked him, lifting her spoon the same way, eating with a calm rhythm. It was no longer survival, it was sharing. In that quiet kitchen, two beings from different worlds sat together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something new. Her lips moved again, whispering sounds he did not know, but her hand pressed to her chest, then to the blanket, then toward him. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was thanking him, not just for food, but for dignity. Ethan nodded, his own hand pressing briefly against his chest, the same gesture she had made earlier. Her eyes widened faintly. Then she repeated the motion, their silent language growing stronger. The night outside could hold hunters, danger, and the cold, but inside his kitchen humanity had been shared, not through words or weapons, but through a meal, through kindness, through trust. Ethan realized then that something irreversible had happened. The loneliness that had ruled his life for years had cracked, replaced with connection, and she, this fragile, broken alien, was no longer just a stranger. She was a guest, and maybe, if the night allowed, something more. The night was long, but for the first time in years Ethan did not feel the weight of it. He sat in his kitchen with the alien woman wrapped in his blanket, her breathing slow and steady now, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. She looked fragile still, but not as desperate as before, the sharp edge of hunger replaced with quiet calm. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. He thought about the scars he had seen, the fear in her eyes when distant sounds echoed through the night. He did not know who or what had done this to her, but he knew one thing with certainty. She had been running for far too long. Her eyes opened again, faint silver reflecting in the dim light. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke softly, his name, broken on her lips but clear enough to reach him. Ethan, she whispered. He froze, warmth spreading through his chest. Hearing his name from her felt different, heavier, like a bridge built between them. He gave a small smile, his voice steady. Yes, he answered, though she might not know the meaning. She tilted her head, then repeated her name, her voice fragile. Ethan echoed it gently, the sound clumsy but full of care. Her lips curved faintly, the smallest smile he had seen from her yet. It was not joy, not laughter, but it was something that said she was beginning to trust. The wind rattled the window again, and she flinched, her body tense, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. Ethan raised his hand slowly, palm open, a gesture of calm. She breathed unevenly, then relaxed, her gaze returning to him. Ethan realized then that she did not need words. She needed presence. Someone who would not push her away. Someone who would not betray her. He had given her food, warmth, and safety. And in return, she had given him something he had thought lost: connection. The silence stretched between them, no longer cold, no longer empty. Ethan reached for the bread and broke a small piece, offering it across the table. She hesitated, then reached forward. Their fingers brushed for a brief second. Light. Almost nothing, yet enough to make both pause. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She accepted the bread, eating slowly, still watching him, not with suspicion anymore, but with something deeper. Ethan's chest tightened. He had lived so long without anyone beside him. And now, here, in the most unlikely way, he had found someone who needed him as much as he needed her. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the night slowly giving way to dawn. Faint light creeping at the edge of the window. She turned her gaze toward it, her expression unreadable, then back at Ethan. She lifted her hand, pressing it gently to her chest, then extended it toward him, not with fear, but with intent. Ethan mirrored the gesture, his palm pressing to his chest, then reaching outward, their motions the same, two beings separated by worlds, yet bound by a simple act. In that moment, no words were needed, the bond was clear. The dawn light grew brighter, casting soft glow across the kitchen. The alien woman's lips curved again, this time more certain, a fragile but real smile. Ethan returned it, feeling something inside him shift. He was no longer a man surrounded by silence, and she was no longer a lost stranger. Together they had begun something new, something fragile, but alive. Their story was far from over. Danger still lingered beyond the horizon. But for this moment, in this small kitchen, they were not alone. They were together, and that was enough.